We are in the grip of what I call the era of violent populism in the United States.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end.
Right now, all eyes are on Washington. But who's actually watching Europe at the moment?
And the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says the death toll in Gaza is now more than 60,000 people since the start of the war.
I'm Roland and this is Battlelines. The murder of Charlie Kirk sent shockwaves not only through the United States but around the world. Is America really entering an era of political violence? If so, why? And what can be done to avert, or at least minimise, further bloodshed? I'll be speaking to one of America's leading scholars of political violence. But first, last week in Nepal, at least 51 people were killed in the worst unrest since the end of a decade-long civil war and the abolition of the monarchy in 2008. The wife of one former Prime Minister was set on fire inside her home, and the Prime Minister was forced to resign. By the end of the week, the Himalayan Republic had a new leader, its first female Prime Minister, who had been elected through a virtual poll on Discord, a US-based free messaging platform mainly used by online gamers. It's a radical experiment in digital democracy in one of South Asia's poorest nations. So what is behind it? For more on this, Venetia Rainey spoke to Saman Latif, the Telegraph's India correspondent.
Saman, welcome to Battlelines. It's been a historic week in Nepal. Let's just walk it back a bit for our listeners. This time last week, last Monday, tens of thousands of protesters had taken to the streets as part of a wave of demonstrations. What were they angry about?
You know, in Nepal, there was already this anger against corruption. It was brewing for some time. Like in March, we saw the protesters, supporters of the former king, were on the streets. So it was that undercurrents of anger was there already against the corruption, against the misgovernance. But the sudden ban on the social media, because like these youth were actually like, whether they were apolitical or they were somehow going through, they were just going ahead. There was anger, but they were like somewhere busy with the content creation on social media, somewhere scrolling on the reels and all that. But that sudden ban on the social media just woke them up from the sleep, and they just realized like they are gone. They're like they have nothing to do, and they suddenly came out on the streets. And before that, what was actually on the social media in Nepal, the so-called Nepo babies, the children of the political elite of the Nepal, their videos were going viral on social media. They were flaunting their lavish lifestyle and all that, while as the ordinary Nepali citizens, they could not afford to meet the ends. So that was the anger was already there. This actually gave it a trigger, and they came out on roads. They started burning the parliament. They started burning the president's house. They started actually attacking all the symbols of the state.
And why was social media banned?
Government actually at that time announced that the social media has to these social media platforms, whether it's a Facebook or it's a Twitter or what, they have to register with the government. Once they register, then only they will be allowed to operate in Nepal. So these 26 websites, these 26 social media platforms were not registered. So they were given some time. They were given 1 week again to register within a week, but they didn't comply to the government order, and that's why they were banned.
Was it a money grab move on behalf of the government, or?
I think it was not about the money. It was actually the growing discontent, the growing the anger within the people, within the youth against the government. That was actually the trigger. They wanted to control the media, social media, so that there are no protesters. Given that they saw in March there were that emergence of protesters, the supporters, thousands of supporters of the former king came on the roads. So this was it was not something. It was not a secret. It was already open that there is anger, but they just needed something to vent that out, and the social media ban just brought them out on the roads.
Okay, so the government tries to crack down on social media to suppress opposition, ends up massively backfiring. Tens of thousands of people take to the streets across Nepal on Monday. And who are these protesters? Are they part of an organised group? What do we know about them?
These protesters are the young generation youth who call themselves Gen Z. Uh, like we have seen the old protests on the streets, but this protest was mostly on social media. It was like on the comment sections, on the threads of the Reddit, on the Discord. So what these people, these youth, they came out, given that all the major websites were banned. So they found first because they didn't know this former Chief Justice of the Nepal. Most of them didn't know her. So they used the Chat GPT, who could be the best leaders for the country. So there were some names. Her name also came out on the from the Chat GPT. Then there were some people who knew her. So her name actually kind of gained prominence among the social media circles. So these Gen Z, then they actually uh, they came together and kind of discussed how to rule the government. So when you say who are these Gen Z, they are actually the young people, teenagers who most of them don't have the jobs. They have come from very good universities outside Nepal as well, but they don't have the jobs. They don't have the businesses there, and most of the businesses actually are uh, controlled by the political elite. So that's why the anger was brewing among them, because of both the power as well as this business. It was actually revolving among these three power centers, which they call the Prachanda, now the former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, and Mr. Debo. So these three people were ruling the Nepal since 2008.
So, as you mentioned, things got quite violent. And by Tuesday, as you said, they were burning down the country's parliament buildings, the home of the Prime Minister, KP Sharma Oli, who you've mentioned a few times. They were chasing other ministers through the street, the foreign minister, the finance minister, assaulting them. Tell us a bit more about the violence that unfolded and how bad things got.
Yeah, when this social media ban happened, so youth, this Gen Z, they found it as a final insult to them. So they came out on the road, started peacefully first. Initially, they started the protest peacefully. But instead of actually the government starting the dialogue, reaching out to them, kind of pacifying them, the government used violence. They used rubber bullets, and almost 3 or 4 journalists were also injured in that who were covering the protest. And in the first assault, almost around 15 or 16 youth died in the first attempt, and dozens of them got injured. So that actually created huge anger in the country and beyond Kathmandu, beyond the capital city. It actually spread across the towns and districts of the Nepal, and youth, cutting across the age groups, like from teenagers to the elders. They came out on the roads. They came out and started attacking the state institutions, attacking these very institutions, like by the palace, the president's house, the prime minister's house, seeing them as the tools who have been oppressing them over the years. So then we should, because of that anger, those because they were young kids, school-going kids who were killed in the first assault. So that enraged the people, and they started attacking the. I saw the former prime minister was actually, and his wife, the foreign minister also. They were dragged out of their home. They were beaten. The finance minister was dragged through the streets. Uh, so there was a lot of anger against these political leaders, and then finally, like we saw finally the resignation of the Prime Minister KP Oli coming from announced late in the night.
And then he was airlifted out by the military, wasn't he? On Wednesday, the remaining president, and the army chief invite a sort of select committee, I guess, of these Gen Z protesters to help discuss how to choose who should form the next government. Tell me a bit more about how the protesters chose who they wanted to nominate as prime minister. You mentioned ChatGPT, and I know Discord was also a big feature.
The president, there was like a lot of speculations going on who is going to be, whether the army will take over. The one thing we need to actually talk about is like these youth, they were against the monarchy. They were against the king. They didn't allow. They are pro-democracy. They want the secular Nepal, the democratic Nepal to sustain. So they were a bit afraid of the army taking over as well. So there were a lot of speculations who is going to be the ruled government, whether it's the army, whether the king will come back and all that. So that's those speculations were there. So then president actually invited some of the youth to the to his office, and then there were discussions. There were some disagreements as well. So finally, these youth leaders, they took on the Discord. Given that the other platforms like we have Zoom, we have the WhatsApp, where there are limitations, like you can't add many people together. So this Discord app, which is actually used as for video games, for banter and all. So they chose Discord app, where the hundreds and hundreds of people could join together, and they can voice their opinions, they can put forward their opinion. So they chose Discord, where in different names, like youth leaders actually propose different names for the interim government. Then finally they zeroed in on the former Chief Justice, now the interim PM, Sushila Kaki. So the social media was a very important tool because they have grown through this social media age. So it played a very important role actually to finalizing and then choosing the candidate for the interim PM.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating how people also seem to be aware of some of the dangers of democracy through online discourse. I noticed that there was like a fact check Discord sort of sub thread where they could look at photos and information that was going around and debunk or verify various claims. So clearly a huge amount of awareness of some of the downsides of doing everything online as well. Tell us a bit more about the new Prime Minister, Sushila Kaki. What do we know about her?
She is considered a highly credible person who, during her tenure as a Supreme Court Chief Justice, has been at that time also seen as very credible, was sticking to the constitution, sticking to the law, and like having very least, I can't say completely apolitical, but like she is seen a very a political person in Nepal. So most of these youth leaders actually repose their faith in her. So the credibility, the integrity she has displayed when she was in the office as a Chief Justice of the Nepal Supreme Court, that actually made her as a first choice to be the interim Prime Minister.
I want to pick up on something you mentioned, and that's the monarchy and people's views for or against it. Nepal's monarchy was abolished in 2008 as part of a peace deal that ended a decade-long civil war, which killed thousands and thousands of people in the country. But I've seen some mention of a pro-monarchy element to the protests, that they want to restore the monarchy. And I know that that's something that media in India, where you're based, has been picking up on as well, that some of the protesters want to restore a nationalist Hindu monarchy. Can you tell us a bit more about how significant that is?
On March 9, 2000, this year, thousands of these demonstrators, the protesters, came out in the capital city, Kathmandu, in favor of restoring the monarchy, with the former king Gayendra Bir Bikram Shah as its head. There was not a widespread, and there still is not a widespread support for the king. But given that people were frustrated with the misgovernance and the corruption in this current government, so they wanted somebody to come and say rescue them, just to bring them out of this corruption. So because these musical chairs, the power was actually like moving between these three people, the KP Sharma, the former prime minister, the Prachanda, the Mr. Debu. So these three were actually like, one would be in the opposition, the other two will be in the power. So like this time, two of them were in the power. So they would form coalition as per their own convenience. So the people thought that the king might rescue them from this, but that didn't actually. They could not galvanize at that time, and they didn't get the majority public support. So that died down quickly. There is actually the element of India actually supporting the king, because like he was seen as pro-India in his tenure when he was heading the country, given that the majority of the people in Nepal are Hindus. They have that cultural, they have that links with India. And but now the current situation in Nepal is such like that you might have seen lots of youth actually protesting against India, Indian media there. So this is altogether a different Nepal we are seeing. Obviously, like India was actually interested, like they wanted somebody in Nepal who could be actually in aligned with their own interests. But given the Chinese growing interest in the country, and KP Sharma, the Communist Party of Nepal, which was led by the Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. So India was kind of sidelined in these over the years from the power center in Nepal. So there was a lot of push from the Indian side as well. They wanted also somebody who could actually be a little bit aligned with the interests of India to come to the power in Nepal. But it is to be seen like where it will go. There's a large population in Nepal still who are pro-India, who believe that their destiny is linked with India, despite having the sovereign nations, but the cultural links they have, the religious links they have. But the people were definitely, they were frustrated with the growing influence of China in the government. And China has always found Communist Party of Nepal as an ally there always.
That's really interesting what you're saying. So it's this sort of geopolitical struggle between, the two major powers in this part of Asia, China and India, which both Nepal is sort of sandwiched in between them. And as you said, KP Sharma Oli was widely seen as leaning towards Beijing. Have we had any reaction from China to these protests and this change of government?
I have not seen any major reactions from Beijing, but I'm sure they might be in the shock, given that this was a stable government they had found in Nepal, and given the proximity that Nepal has with the Tibet and the Chinese border, so Nepal was kind of their extension in this region to control even India. Like you might have seen recently, like there has been like many statements which came out from the Nepal government which were not liked by the Indian government. So they were obviously coming on behalf of the China. So this influence was actually also frustrating the Indian lobby in Nepal.
So do you think over the next 6 months ahead of elections, Parliament's now been dissolved and the Prime Minister has said that she'll just be an interim Prime Minister unless she gets elected properly in 6 months' time. Over the next 6 months, are we going to see a tussle between India and China to try and get forward their candidate?
Absolutely. Both countries would like their own people to be holding the power in Nepal. Definitely they will try their best, but it is to be seen because the country now stands at a fragile threshold. For now, the interim Prime Minister, Sushila Karki, though she embodies credibility in a system corroded by lies, by corruption. But I believe the youth, they will not stay silent. They have shown they won't just scroll silently anymore. They won't accept the crimes. They won't accept the corruption. But this is not just the cycle of revolution, which many people, youth, told me. This is not just another cycle of revolution and betrayal. It feels like a generational shift. The young are demanding something new. Whether Nepal, this fragile republic, can deliver, that is the question the world is watching.
Venetia Rainey and Saman Latif, the Telegraph's India correspondent, reporting on recent unrest in Nepal. Coming up, does the murder of Charlie Kirk make more bloodshed in America inevitable?
Hey, it's me, Venetia Rainey. We've just released a mini-series about the rise of China's military, and I think you'll really like it. It's a deep dive into the strengths and weaknesses of the People's Liberation Army under leader Xi Jinping, and what it all means for Taiwan. As the US pivots to the Indo-Pacific, understanding China's armed forces has never been more important. You can listen to all 3 episodes now. Just click the link in the show notes or search Battlelines China wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. The murder last week of the right-wing activist Charlie Kirk has prompted anger, anguish, and fear that the United States is tipping further into an era of political assassination. Comparisons have been made to the 1960s, which saw the killings of JFK, Martin Luther King, and Robert F. Kennedy. Is America really entering an era of political violence? If so, why, and what can be done to avert or at least minimise further bloodshed? Robert Pape is Professor of Political Science at the University of Chicago and founder and director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, which has been tracking support for political violence in America for the past 4 years. I began by asking him what was his initial thought when he heard the news of Kirk's murder.
Tragic, but predictable. In June, I published a major piece in the New York Times entitled, "We are on the brink of major political violence in the United States." I was warning about exactly this type of event, major political violence that would have major consequences reverberating through the country. And I'm sorry to say that the assassination death of Charlie Kirk is exactly that type of an event.
How did you see this coming? Why do you believe America is on the brink of political violence? Why was this so predictable?
We are in the grip of what I call the era of violent populism in the United States. The era of violent populism is characterized by two things. First and foremost, it is characterized by rising political violence on both the right and the left. And if you look at just since 2022, we've seen the assassination attempt against conservative Supreme Court Brett Kavanaugh, against Speaker of the House, Democratic Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, missed her, almost killed her husband. 2 assassination attempts against Republican candidate for president, Donald Trump. We've seen an assassination attempt in April of this year against Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. In June, 2 assassinations and other multiple assassination attempts against Democratic leaders in Minnesota. And now the assassination death of one of the most prominent political leaders of the MAGA movement, Charlie Kirk. You have to go back to the 1960s before you see anything like this string of political assassinations in the United States. The second big feature of the era of violent populism is that we are seeing a groundswell of support for political violence among Americans on both the right and the left. For over 4 years, my center at the University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats has conducted extensive surveys of Americans on their support for political violence. We do this about every quarter. We've done about 15. Our May survey showed the highest levels yet of support for political violence on both the right and the left. 39% of Democrats agree that the use of force is justified to remove Donald Trump from the presidency. And we know from other survey data that when people say the use of force is justified, 55% of them mean assassinations, lethal use of force, not just yelling. On the right, we found 24% of Republicans agree that Donald Trump should use the U.S. military to suppress Democratic protesters. And what this amounts to is on both the right and the left, there are tens of millions of Americans who support the use of force. And this is going side by side with this rising tide of actual political assassinations and assassination attempts. Those are the reasons that I put in that New York Times op-ed in June. I warned that we are on the brink of major violence, major political violence, and unfortunately, this is where we are.
What do you think then? You talk about, you listed those incidents since 2022. You've been watching this since 2021. You talked about how you have to go back to the 1960s and the killings of the Kennedy brothers and Martin Luther King and so on before you see a similar kind of string of attacks. What's going on? Why now are we seeing this rise in support for violence and this polarization?
The internet is a dangerous problem, but it is only pouring gasoline on a fire. It is not the fire itself. I've studied political violence for 30 years all around the world. Big social change often causes big political violence in countries around the world. This is what is the taproot of what's occurring in America. The United States, for the first time in its 250-year history, is transitioning from a white majority democracy to a white minority democracy. In 1990, we were 76% non-Hispanic white as a population. Today, that's 57%. In 10 years, maybe 15, depending on the mass deportations, we will then be a white minority democracy. We started going through the generational tipping point of this change about 10 years ago, and that corresponds with the meteoric rise of Donald Trump, why immigration is his signature issue, and why the issue of immigration on the right has morphed from stopping people at the border to deporting millions in from the United States. At the same time, this also explains the virulent reaction on the left to Donald Trump and the immigration issue. Basically, what you are seeing is, as we're going through this tipping point generation, there's a significant number of people on the right, not everybody on the right, but a significant number of people on the right who want to slow this down or maybe reverse it. There are people on the left who want to keep it going, maybe even accelerate it. This is because when you have big social changes like this will definitely impact politics in profound ways and change the winners and losers in the country. And that is why big social change leads to political violence. And that is what we are living through. And left to its own devices, this will escalate.
What then is your prescription for action to minimize this or to avoid that escalation?
In the very near term, we have to focus on the immediate consequences over the next few months of the Kirk assassination. That means we have to worry about copycat attacks against other leaders of the right. That includes Republican political leaders and also prominent media figures. We also have to worry about retaliatory attacks from the right on the left, again, against prominent Democratic leaders and also prominent liberal media figures. In order to slow down this momentum, to push back on it, our political leaders need to do much more. They need to not only do what they're doing now, which is a good thing, which is to condemn political violence from their own silos. And that is a big change, I should point out, and they should be commended for it. Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has done an excellent job of doing that. You also see Governor Gavin Newsom condemning the Kirk assassination in a full-throated way. However, we now need to do more to meet the moment. This isn't enough because we're in the grip of this escalating era of violent populism. To do more, our political leaders on the right and the left need to make joint video statements. They need to come together, Republican and Democratic leader, on the same video. They need to condemn violence. And the reason that's crucial is because political leaders can only restrain their own constituents. When they criticize the constituents of the other party, we know from our surveys, this produces defiance and actually escalates, increases support for political violence. It's the worst of both worlds. It's the worst world. Best world is for the political leaders to come together in the same video, and we need this for governors. We need this with members of Congress, and ideally, we would have a summit. Trump and J.D. Vance, Governor Newsom, Governor Pritzker, condemning political violence from whatever side of the aisle it comes from. That would be a powerful move to restrain this rising tide of political violence in the United States. It would be a historic move that would meet the historic moment.
That's the ideal scenario. There's also those voices out there, and some of them very prominent on social media, talking about, this is now war with the radical left. We've had Donald Trump talking about specifically about cracking down on the radical left in response. You have people using the terminology of civil war. Is there a danger that that could become a self-fulfilling prophecy? I suppose another way of asking that question is, how bad could this get if it is not checked?
What you are seeing is the sorrow and fear from the Kirk assassination start to transform into anger, and that then can go further and start to transform into violence. A good example of this was how America responded after 9/11. 9/11 wounded America as a country. We were deeply sorrowful, deeply fearful. Within months, that translated into anger. Within 18 months, 70% of Americans supported the invasion and conquest and occupation of Iraq on the flimsiest of reasons, and turned a blind eye effectively when that triggered a civil war in Iraq, killing 100,000 Iraqis. This is unfortunately what can happen with wounded communities. Right now, both the left and the right feel wounded. And what you are seeing is fear and sorrow is morphing into anger, and that can encourage volatile actors who are already volatile for their own psychosocial reasons to lash out, nudge them over the edge to violence in the belief they are actually defending a community. And this can happen on both sides. And so this is why it is imperative that we meet the moment now, because what you're describing, what you're seeing on Twitter, what you're seeing on X with the rise of civil war tweets, et cetera, which I'm tracking too. We do this in our center, and we were some of the first to actually use Twitter Binder to do this 3 years ago. That's why the New York Times is doing it. We sent this to them 3 years ago. And the fact is, this does correspond with rising actual political violence. In fact, when we did this, we did it in August 9th, 2022, right after the Mar-a-Lago raid on by the FBI on Donald Trump's estate. And we saw, using Twitter Binder, that the Civil War tweets were going up. We warned everybody we could, law enforcement, the newspapers. However, they didn't really respond to it until 3 days later. A Trump supporter went to the FBI field office in Cincinnati, shot it up, died in a firefight with the FBI, and posted on Trump's Truth Social just before he died, he did it for Trump.
I suppose the question is, at what point does it stop being lone wolves or people like that and become, some people fantasize about a civil war?
If we do not step up to the moment, this will escalate according to its own momentum. You can bring me back. We can talk about what that looks like in a week or two or a few weeks, but we're not going to go there now, because we need to focus on now, not worry about 6 months from now, 4 months from now.
Just one very last thing, because we look at kind of global issues. I mean, I know you're studying American violence, but what do you think America's allies or other nations should make of this?
Number one, the social causes I'm describing, the demographic shifts, are happening in other Western democracies. America's the leading edge of this. Some of the details of those demographic shifts vary, but this is why I have advised the Canadian government, the British government, the German government has been interested in this, because they too are going through different versions of this demographic shift, although not America's basically a few years ahead, but they're not far behind. The second thing is America. This isn't anymore just policy choices about whether America is going to be deeply involved in the long-term security of other countries. When Americans are their own worst enemies, that means necessarily other countries are going to be lower priority for America. And that's just because of the situation of violent populism. This is way beyond whether it's Donald Trump in the Oval Office or not. This is about the era of violent populism. This is important for other governments to take seriously.
Professor Robert Pape of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats there. That's all for today. Donald Trump is arriving in London tomorrow for his second state visit. What does it say about the state of the special relationship? Can Donald Trump having tea with the king save the transatlantic alliance? Or are Britain and America drifting inexorably apart? We will probably be talking about all that on Friday. Until then, that was Battle Lines. Goodbye. Battle Lines is an original podcast from The Telegraph created by David Knowles. If you appreciated this show, please consider following Battle Lines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review as it helps others find the show. To stay on top of all our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign on to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine, for latest. You can also get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. This episode of Battle Lines was hosted by me, Roland Oliphant, and produced by Max Bauer. The executive producer is Louisa Wells.